You might recognize our next speaker from the Oscar-nominated documentary Crip Camp. Judy Heumann is an internationally recognized leader in the disability rights independent living movement. Her work with a wide range of activist organizations, NGOs, nonprofits, and governments since the 1970s has contributed greatly to the development of human rights legislation and policy that benefits disabled people. She has advocated for disability rights at home and abroad, serving in the Clinton and Obama administrations and as the World Bank's first advisor on disability and development. Judy, we are very honored to have you here with us today.
For those of you in the audience who might be blind or low vision, let me please give you my description. I am a white quadriplegic post-polio in Washington, D.C. In my foyer, I have brown hair, which goes to my neck. I'm wearing pearl earrings, a necklace, and a bright pink top. And I'm surrounded by plants and photos and postcards of my family and from friends. I really feel very privileged to be with you all today and following these three great presenters. And Michael, in talking about, a little bit of fear and nervousness, I kind of always get a little nervous when I'm about to give a presentation. So let me first say that a number of years, well, for many years actually, people were approaching me about writing a book about my story. And I have given thousands of presentations over my 74-year life. And of course, as I was getting older, my stories became more intriguing, engaging. I was doing more work and people really wanted to know more about this, but I really didn't feel that my story would necessarily sell. And equally, I wasn't going to be able to write a book by myself. So I have a woman who worked with me, Kristen Joyner, and that is another very interesting aspect of how this book came together. She's a non-disabled woman and I was a feminist and but knew very little about disability. So that whole story, not to discuss today, is something in and of itself that's very interesting. Now, when I was convinced that this duo would be valuable in putting a story forward, I really had to think deeply about how did I want to present my voice. And it was very important for me that my voice in this story, in my memoir, be really authentic and one where disabled and non-disabled people could relate to my experiences. And by that, I mean, you can see in this book and in the film Crip Camp, and let me just say, many schools are using the book and the film together, which also, expands the audience of who will engage in this discussion. But it was important for me that I be authentic and that I really think deeply about stories that in some cases were very painful. Thinking about and discussing and writing about discrimination over the course of one's life is something that I think was very eye-opening, but definitely even today, as I do a lot of speaking about the book and the movie, I still find myself frequently tearing up, but also listening to people who have read the book, watched the film, done both, talk about how the book is very emotional. Disabled individuals find it emotional because they see themselves, many people, in this book. My parents, as I think everyone was explaining in their books, my parents too played a very important role in my life, having had polio when I was only 18 months old. And I was the first of my parents' three children. And my parents were German Jewish refugees who lost many family members in the Holocaust. They were not advocates. And so they really needed to learn to become advocates. When my mother took me to school and the principal denied me the right to go to school because he called me a fire hazard. There were no laws in the 1950s that made that illegal. And so the book will give you information about how I felt, my experiences, and the role that my parents played. The book also really, as it moves forward, allows people not only to learn about the ongoing discrimination that I and many other people were facing, but also allows people to see that myself and my friends and others really recognize that we could be living in a world where we continue to talk about the problems, or we could begin to look at solutions. And for me, looking at my mom and my dad as having played a very important role in not accepting problems, but looking at them as challenging and moving forward, was something that I began to own. And as I got older, recognizing that my parents no longer were going to be the ones who should be the leading people fighting for my rights, but also that I needed to take on that role. You learn about my going to high school, my segregated elementary school classes, experiences in universities, and my choice in finding a job. My first job where I wanted to be a teacher, but was denied my right to be a teacher because of paralysis of both lower extremities, sequelae of poliomyelitis. That was what the New York City Board of Education said was the reason I couldn't teach. My struggle really to determine whether or not I was going to go forward and sue the Board of Ed. The ability for me to find attorneys and ultimately going and suing the Board of Ed and getting my job, and then the organizations and work that was coming as a result of that. I'm a collaborator, I'm a networker, that comes throughout the book. I'm also influenced by other movements. The civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the anti-war movement, all played a very important role in my development and the development of my friends. I think the experiences at camp and moving forward really allow people to see how, as disabled people, we come together and can have fun like anybody else. But also that period of time was one of reflections about what we wanted the world to look like. And I think that is very important, that we didn't necessarily know how we were going to make the changes. We weren't engineers. How are you going to make a bus accessible? We hadn't yet started going to universities to study various things, but we had a belief that given what existed in the United States, the barriers that were before us were not there because we didn't have the technological ability, but were before us because people did not believe that we as disabled people had the capacity, or quite frankly, the interest in being equal members of society. This is something that you read throughout the book. You see the growth and development that we are experiencing, and the pride that we are taking in being able to get new laws over the last 40, 50 years that really are beginning to make a change in our lives. This story is resonating intergenerationally. I lecture on a regular basis at universities. There are a number of universities that have already adopted this book. And I'm very excited about this. But additionally, I'm doing many presentations with book clubs of people from all ages, and listening to the comments from disabled high school students, college students, and older is also, I think, something that would be really beneficial for college students and staff and faculty. many disabled people, most disabled people, have invisible disabilities. And one of the outcomes of this book is allowing people to see that disabilities should be seen as a natural and normal part of life, and that coming together as disabled individuals with allies is something that is beginning to change the world. The disability community is made up of people who are Black and Brown and Indigenous, from the LGBTQI community, from different religions. And while I am a white non-disabled person, a white disabled person, the book brings many of these issues to the forefront. So I really hope that you look seriously at the value of this book. I think the book allows people to understand the importance of how to be change agents in the broadest way, how to influence legislation, regulations, how to be more engaged with the media, how to take an issue that previously was looked at as a medical issue and turning it into a rights-based issue. Given the changes that are going on in the United States with a more activist, proactive disability rights community, this book is really one that will be an example, not the only book, but an example of where we've been, where we are, and where we can be going together. Thank you so much.